As always, please retry the question before watching the video. There are two things you need to know to be able to answer this question. If you don't know the answer to either of them, please add them to your cheat sheet, master them, and go back 5 before continuing in the video. What are the 3 things that can be wrong with a clause question? Punctuation in the middle of a clause, no independent clause in a sentence, clauses separated improperly. What is another way to identify a clause question? That is dependent clause markers changing from answer to answer. Dependent clause markers changing from answer to answer. So, a couple things going on here. We have dependent clause markers. Having is a participle, the ing. You should recognize that there was an ing on that, and same with answer H. To is a preposition. So we have dependent clause markers in several of the answers. And right there off the bat, if you have 3 answers that have dependent clause markers and one doesn't, you already know the one that doesn't is almost certainly going to be, or vice versa. If only one of the answers has a dependent clause markers and the other one does not, then the one that does not, the odd man out, is almost always going to be your right answer. And it does end up being that G is the correct answer here. But let's just take a look at why, okay, just in case you didn't catch that. So answer F. We see the dependent clause markers are changing from answer to answer. Even if you didn't recognize that, it should just be a part of your reasoning to consider the 3 things, because they put clause questions everywhere. They put clause questions everywhere, all right? So we'll consider the 3 things. Is there an independent clause in a sentence is what we're going to ask, because there's not punctuation in the part that we're dealing with, so it's not going to be punctuation of a clause. There are multiple clauses, so you could consider, clauses separated improperly. That would be a wise thing, or no independent clause in a sentence, okay? So I want you to just consider those 2 things for each of the answers now. I want you to see if the clauses are separated properly and if there's an independent clause in each of the answers. Just ask yourself that. Pause the video and see if you can figure that out on your own. All right, so answer F, having to tell them soon. Is that an independent clause? It's not, okay? It starts with a dependent clause marker. So actually tomorrow isn't there, so we just won't read it with tomorrow. We'll keep going all the way to stay. Having to tell them soon of her decision to stay. All right, so that starts with a dependent clause marker. Therefore, that is not an independent clause. It's a dependent clause, okay? That she would not be coming home to China. That is another dependent clause marker, and therefore we have 2 dependent clauses, and there is no independent clause in answer F, so we can eliminate answer F. Answer G, Yuming had to tell them soon of her decision to stay. So this, Yuming had, that's a subject-verb combo. It does not start with a dependent clause marker. Therefore, this is an independent clause. Therefore, the sentence does have an independent clause. It's independent followed by dependent, which is separated by a comma, which is what they do. And so everything is correct about answer G. Answer H, her having to tell them soon of her decision to stay. All right, there's no verb here. Having is not a verb. It looks like a verb. It's a participle. But participles need to have a helping verb to be a verb. And so you might have gotten tripped up on that part. But if it ends in an ing, it must have a helping verb to be a verb, okay? It could be a noun, which is when it would be a gerund, but that's a different thing that we'll deal with for another problem, not on this one. But for now, there is no independent clause in answer H, so we can eliminate H because there's no independent clause. And J is going to be the same. It starts with 2. Therefore, this is a dependent clause. Therefore, same problem as the others. There's no independent clause, confirming that our answer G is correct. If this made sense to you, please add it to your worksheet. Write what you learned along with the answer on the explanation side, and then continue on to do the remaining clause 2 questions that you missed on this test. If this is your final clause 2 question you missed on this test, please go ahead and do the clause 2 mastery to get 10 questions correct in a row before moving on to the next question.